Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
In today's world, where new problems are lurking around every corner, design thinking has become necessary. It's not just about solving a problem, but about creating integrated and impactful experiences that are inclusive and meaningful for all the stakeholders. It helps find simple yet innovative solutions depending on the user's contexts while ensuring its usability. So, how can designers practice design thinking to create minimalistic yet impactful experiences? To know more about this theme, in this episode, we interact with Debayan Mukherjee, General Manager, User Experience Design at Samsung Electronics. With 2 decades of work experience in design centric roles, he holds expertise in user experience design, user interface design, and interaction design. And that's why, on our journey of discovering designeering, we talk to him about creating future of design. Hello, Debayan, and welcome to Avantika Designeering podcast series. It's an honor and pleasure to host you on our show today.
Hello. Yeah, it's a pleasure this side as well.
Superb. So, Debayan, as our ice breaking question, we all understand how the craft of design touches every part of our lives. Everyone has a different approach to problem solving and designing solutions. The question that I have for you as an icebreaker: how can designers develop the ability to approach complex challenges and simple yet innovative solutions?
Okay. Um, so, design thinking in itself is the answer to defining problems, um, not just correctly, but also strategically, with the designer immersing completely into the user's life and problems, alongside deeply understanding business scenarios and technological landscapes, using them as enablers and internalizing all of the processed data to an extent that any level of complexity of problem space can be very simply and effectively framed to efficiently approach a design solution. So, the key here is to understand and learn and continuously practice user centric design processes and design thinking approaches to run it correctly. And that's the only way of arriving at a meaningful solution. When I say meaningful, it's like meaningful to the user, meaningful to the customer or consumer, whichever way it is, while also staying meaningful and beneficial to the business and your stakeholders, of course.
Bob, well said, and absolutely important. In fact, while we launched our show with Tim Kobe last week, and we also spoke about the passion in which you go out and actually create value for the customer and how it actually makes a difference to them, which changes the entire definition of success of a product itself. So, absolutely well put there. So, moving from that icebreaker, Debayan, to your journey, you have an experience of close to 2 decades in the user experience domain. From architecture to consumer goods to smartphones, we are excited to hear about your design journey. Can you take us through your professional journey?
Yeah, so, um, well, these days it's quite uh, commonplace. But at that time, in the time I hail from, this sort of journey was quite unusual. Um, that was the time for engineers and doctors to evolve. It still is, but designers were probably only a bunch of fashion designers. And architecture, on the other hand, meant serious business. It was meant for a creative few with a sense of scale to become hardcore architects, run firms, run site to site with blueprints tucked in the underarms, and not really for transforming into other fields of design like product design and UX design and sorts. So it was therefore sort of unusual for my boss. I was working in Delhi with a corporate architecture firm for about 2 years, and also for my dad, who painstakingly grew me into an architect. But I wanted to explore and not settle yet, explore the wild world of design. So I sort of broke free and took a leap of faith. After practicing architecture for a couple of years, went to NID to study product design, and then worked with Gillette in Delhi and Intel in Bangalore. Then found myself hired by a mobile service provider in Hyderabad, working with mobile carrier giants like Airtel and Verizon on their consumer portals and B2B products. And then landed up in Samsung when Samsung Bangalore R&D decided to set up an in-house UX team back in 2009. We were a team of the famous first five that grew to 80 designers over the last 12 years of me being here, and is still every day, feels like the journey has just begun, with so much energy, so much talent in the midst of cutting edge technology, continuously making a difference to consumers' lives, making meaningful innovations, unique inventions. So, yeah, that's sort of wrapping it all up, summarizing my close to 2 decades in 2 minutes.
Super. I think that was a quick capsule. I just have one question here. How has your journey of exposure in architecture helped you today in the user experience design that you are building with your current organization?
So, it's kind of design at the end of it. Architecture kind of brings a different scale to the mind. When I started architecture, studying architecture, practicing architecture, I didn't think about product design. But when I came to product design, I realized the same design principles, the same design methodology, the same structure works in all forms of design, in product design and UX design. Just the scale keeps changing. Like you would be thinking in a much more bigger, a macro scale when you think of architecture or space design, but when it comes to product design, it kind of the scale a lot of times shrinks to a really micro scale. So if your mind is able to kind of shuttle between those two scales, you kind of exercise your mind to kind of think irrespective of scale. I think it's possible to kind of have a holistic understanding around design with a problem in the center, with the user in the center, and the main job kind of commonly being defining the problem and then kind of developing a solution, co-working with people around you.
Super. Well said in terms of actually connecting the dots in the real life. In fact, Debayan as design is a very subjective field. Leading a team of designers isn't very easy, with everyone having their own opinions. And you just mentioned about the large team that you are a part of. How do you ensure that there aren't any coordination failures between the teams so that you can deliver the projects on time?
So yeah, so that's why, like I said, we have a design process. Your question is not just relevant to designers only, who come with different opinions. Going forward, it's going to be relevant to stakeholders like engineers and product managers and business teams in a corporate or business scenario, who come together as a team on a project with various opinions, expectations, and requirements. So the question is, or the question should be, how do you align them to a common goal and vision and collaboratively drive a result? Well, Let's imagine you're the design manager, or you're the design sprint master. You can do it. It's your role as a sprint master. You're a coach. You facilitate and you identify the design challenge for the sprint, bring a team together. You take them along through all the sprint stages, select the key challenge and progressive deliverables for the team. And you are responsible for keeping it continuously relevant, inspiring, and focused. Uh, you would have to work with everyone, use the team's energy to evangelize the design process, bring participation and accountability. You have to work with data to make sense of how things shape up at every stage. And that's how you drive the team through an iterative process to arrive at an agreeable and meaningful result that by the end of it is already bought into and shared amongst your coworkers.
Absolutely relevant. I think, as you rightly put it down, the way you actually work in teams and across domains, whether you part of the design team or the product development, the engineering team, I think this is completely relevant to all of them. In fact, moving from that thought, they buy into my next one, which is designers come from a different starting point. They have years of experience with designing, so their brains are trained and wired to these skills, mindsets, and say tools. The question that I have is, what are some of the ways through which designers can unlearn and learn new skills to benefit from the power of design thinking completely? I mean, let's take a cue. Today, in the world of user experience design, it's so dynamic. I mean, it's changing every few weeks, every few days, and there's so much of unlearning which is required and learning with these new tools. So how does one manage it?
So, yeah, again, extremely relevant and very good question. So, I have a slightly different take to it. Like, I know this buzzword of unlearn has been around for a while. Like when I was in design school, we heard this the first time that, hey, you're from architecture, you have to unlearn first, okay? And then you become a product design. But in today's scenario, does it really make sense anymore? With so much happening, so many different kinds of designers doing so many different things in sequence, sometimes in parallel, multitasking between a GUI piece and an artwork, or from a space design to an illustration, also while influencing on a social network. So we really need to kind of sit back and really think it through. Is it unlearn anymore? Or is it assimilate, synergize, or synthesize all the accumulated knowledge that you have gathered en route and orchestrate role plays to be able to be the design thinker and thought leader when and where it requires you to be? So I truly believe all of the knowledge is useful. At the same time, to look at the problem from different perspectives and depths, to understand the user and the problem space very deeply. In fact, it's said these days that designers should read on subjects that they are not comfortable with. They are, that are at times unrelated, like history and mathematics, for those neurons to fire, to make connections and evolve and instill meaning to an otherwise non-existent, sometimes meaningless, frustrating or painful user experience. That's designers today making the most of the power of design thinking.
Hey, did you know Samsung's upcycling solution for TV packaging received a silver award for its customizable packaging box at the world renowned International Design Excellence Award 2020? Absolutely well said. I have a twist here, Debayan, and I wish to ask you that over a period of time, has there been any one thing that has stayed with you constantly, no matter the change in domain, the change in area of design? But that's something that's constantly stayed with you. Any one such thing that you wish to highlight?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So actually, not just one, there are multiple, but since you asked me one, I'll try to prioritize one or two.
Oh yeah,
So,
feel free to give us the top ones. I think it will add a lot of value to our listeners.
yeah, so one thing, of course, is the laser focus on user. You as a designer, you as an architect, you are the only, user advocate in the room when you're working with stakeholders. So you have to be a very, very strong advocate from the user angle. You have to understand the user very, very deeply. You have to kind of understand and empathize with the problem very strongly. You have to internalize all of the data. So all the suppose you're running a design sprint, you should be the person in the room who has the best hold of all the data that has been collected so far. All the user statements should be inside you, internalized. So that's one thing that kind of stays on, I think, from the point that you start. Probably, most of the times designers are artists when they start studying design. Most of the students would tell you they used to be good at drawing when they thought of becoming designers. So art is something that they were doing for themselves, but then they became a designer for the user. So that stays on. So the user focus, the problem focus, the understanding focus, and kind of the evangelization focus, right? To be able to kind of bring that essence to your team, to your product, to your consumer, to your stakeholders. I think that stays on.
Well said, and completely agree in terms of how the journey over a period of time helps you to keep building on some of these skills, and keep delivering successfully to your clients. Absolutely well said. In fact, moving the gear, from those learning to again the world of design thinking. Design thinking created an opening for designers to move from the aesthetically focused space to the problem solving phase. But design is not just problem solving. I believe it's much more than that. In fact, the crux is the connection between finding the right question itself, solving it in a good way, and making it look good as well. The
Mhm.
question that I have for you here, Debayan, is how can designers integrate all these factors to create more impactful and meaningful experiences?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, again, extremely relevant and good question. So, your first 2 points, finding the right question and solving in a good way, are kind of well within design thinking scope. The first one being what we call understanding and defining, and the second one being about diverging and deciding as per, say, Google Design Sprint principles. And as per IDEO design principles, these are the inspiration and the ideation stages, respectively. Essentially, pretty much part of your design process itself. But your third point, making it look good, is actually very interesting. It's actually what we call visual design, or visual thinking, or visual concepting. Uh, Part of it should be explored during the design sprint itself, while studying visual trends around the product space. The results of this study may actually influence or enable the design decision itself. And part of it, is explored during low to high fidelity prototyping, iteratively, of course, before the product goes into production. And it's an important thing to understand that it doesn't end there. The process is always iterative. After the first release, there could be some beta testing, based on which there could be several stages of iterations and versions that the product could go through. The design keeps evolving and breathing and improving and continuously aligning to the consumer's day-to-day life going forward. And so does, all of this, all of these three things that you mentioned.
Absolutely. In fact, that also connects me to one more interesting element is that while working in a product for the population with such cultural diversity, various elements such as language, imagery, design positioning, some are building a design for the mass population. And you've been part of organizations that have gone out and created products for masses as well. How did you integrate all of these elements to create an appropriate product for the mass population? And what were some of the challenges which you faced while developing these products?
Yeah, so you know this understanding also is changing. The understanding that every product should reflect a localized culture, or a product portfolio should reflect the cultural or the socio-economic diversity. Well, it may still be largely true to some extent in specific domains, but broadly, what we see today is that the boundaries are blurring between local and global standards and preferences of flavors and aspirations. Even in tier threes and twos, uh, you will see global aspirations, while the budget may still be quite local. And therefore the diversity, I mean, the diverse supply, uh, whether it's cars or smartphones or soaps or toothpastes, you would see global aspirations being met with global products, or say wannabe global products, so to say. uh, so the mass is not, no longer really mass. The aspirations are a much higher, than us. So these aspirations need to be very cleverly understood and catered to, while fitting into every pocket, of course. Your insights that come out from your research should be, correct. And that's the primary challenge that can only be, overcome with the thoroughness of your research and design thinking.
In fact, Debayan, while you answered my last two questions, one of the questions that I want to ask you is there any product that you could share that either you worked in your uh, corporate journey, or any other product that you see in the industry that's gone out and actually nailed this in a beautiful way in terms of really understanding the connection between the right questions, solving it in good way, and making it look good, as well as maybe a product which is for the mass population. Any example that intrigues you, that excites you, that you would want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so there are several products of that sort. Like, we kind of made something called, say, social camera about 3 or 4 years back, which was essentially a local product. Like, it was based on a very, very local sentiment and an insight that we had identified from our research, uh, which was which was true for millennials at that time, which told us that millennials were kind of associating themselves with the digital immediacy. They wanted to share things immediately from the camera. Say, as soon as you capture, you need to share. You know, so there were actually ads on TV from other brands where a celebrity was capturing a selfie with a fan and immediately sharing it with her. So that was the local aspiration. And we wanted to make a local product and make it a global aspiration. And kind of we did it to some extent. We came up with a product, an interaction, and it was an invention. In fact, we patented that interaction because it was so unique. It was actually the fastest method of sharing from the camera. So yeah, it resulted in a great experience and a great product. The consumers loved it. So yeah, so there are many such examples in the body of work that we do.
Hey, did you know Samsung India's biggest and most trusted electronics company, recently launched Powering Digital India, its brand new vision for the country that will be driven by an exciting new citizenship program aimed at students across the nation. A refreshed local research and development strategy with special focus on the local startup community and new initiatives in manufacturing. Absolutely, I think that's a very exciting and interesting example. And in fact, when you spoke about the global market part, part of it, in fact, in today's world, customers think a lot about choosing the right product, which is enhancing their experience and adding value to their lives. The question that I have is, do you believe this over analysis creates difficulties in developing experiences, especially when we are creating for global markets?
Mhm. Yeah, mm, well, I won't say it creates difficulties. As a designer, I would love the challenge to identify, the continuously changing and diverse problem space. It's challenging, of course, to cater to a consumer who is increasingly more intelligent, more observant, more knowledgeable, and sensible than yesterday, and to improve his or her life today by easing his or her daily life experiences. So, plain gimmick and titillating emotional experiences that probably worked yesterday won't work as well today unless they are very carefully enveloped around functional advantages, providing very clear value to the user to be able to aspire to do more and to be more than yesterday. So yeah, so it clearly won't work otherwise.
Wow, you summed it up in a really beautiful way in that last line. And my next question to you, Debayan, comes from something which has been a trend of late, and a lot of people talking about it. In fact, our digital magazine last issue was partially based on the theme of minimalism, which is a timeless design concept that has been used in various eras, but much spoken about now. And it is relatively new as far as design is concerned. The question that I have is, how can designers develop the ability to do more with less, keeping usability and inclusivity in mind?
Great question. So, yeah, I will try to show you another angle of it. So, I believe there have always been a balance between maximalism and minimalism when it comes to design. Like, for example, while in Germany in the 1920s there was Bauhaus and Mies van der Rohe on one hand, there was Art Deco in US and Neo Gothic in England and Beaux Arts in France, all around the same time, yet at different, significantly different levels of complexity and ornamenteness. So, so that carries on, and even today, you see degrees and degrees of purposeful complexities in products strategically defined based on consumer preferences and identities, underlying philosophies that are created over years of using them. For example, when it comes to, say, my domain, like smartphones, uh, you would have seen a distinct difference in identities and philosophies between, say, iOS and Android. In iOS, you would generally find a more minimal approach, find one way of doing one thing. But when it comes to Android, it's more of maximalism, where there are tons of ways of doing one thing. But that's the whole point. I mean, that's the strategy and that's the consumer understanding. So it really depends on your target audience and your strategy, your understanding of your user, who they are, what they want, what have they wanted over the years from you, how they use your product, what their aspirations are, what their goals and desires are. All of that need to be deeply understood, empathized, and internalized. And that's how an identity evolves. and develops. And complexity is minimal approaches, usability, and inclusivity uh, are decided by the designer by knowing who you're designing for, who uses your product, by deeply understanding your user.
Absolutely. In fact, from who uses your product to where the customer interacts with your product is where my next question comes from. If you see, Debayan, companies interact with their customers across multiple channels through their website, social media, mobile applications, and we can keep talking about so many multiple channels out there. All these channels allow the customers to actually experience the product, and for companies to serve clients in various ways, convenient and effective, and boost the brand's image and credibility as well. The question that I have for you is, how can we provide a consistent experience across channels, especially both online and offline? This also comes with one of the most magnificent creations of Samsung at Bangalore in terms of the experience store that you have, and how beautifully, as an organization, it's gone out and balanced online business and the offline business. So how do you go out there and provide this consistent experience out there?
Yeah, well, this again depends on the company's strategy and philosophy of customer interaction and communication and issue resolution. Uh, a straightforward answer to your question when it comes to interfaces is responsiveness of design. How a certain interface and experience can be scaled across various form factors, transformed across real estates to maintain a consistent identity and structure. But online and offline is pretty tricky. I mean, I really don't know if there can be any lines drawn. It may be a very challenging thing to do, and a very heavy investment to make. Not sure how many organizations really do that, and what sort of ROI they get. It needs to be studied to kind of accurately answer. But essentially, it's an important thing to do, and it's an important thing to do online for sure. And that's what One UI, for example, does for Samsung smartphones, for example. And such structural and visual policies that unify experiences and make it easier and faster and more convenient and efficient for users to use a product, because they do it on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And while we spoke in the entire conversation about a lot of blends, including a last question where we were talking about the blend between offline and online as well, that companies strategically decide. My last question for you is also on one such blended philosophy that we follow at Avantika University. Um, to differentiate ourselves from our peers and sister concerns, we said that today, an important philosophy which is relevant is a blended approach of design and engineering. And we coined a term for it called as designeering. The question that I have for you, Debayan, is, do you think that such philosophy is need of the hour, and we need to train the talent to build perspective in designeering and not necessarily only in design or only in engineering? What are your thoughts about it?
Hmm. It's very interesting, actually. It's a good concept. I would love to know more, really, kind of deeply, what it really means. Sounds interesting, though. Thinking from a design education point of view, uh, it might be an interesting take on teaching methodology to marry aspects of design and engineering in the classroom, and look at it from a product development perspective instead of only focusing on the design problem or process. But I mean, if I have to think about it, it can be equally challenging. I don't know how you guys make it happen. Do designers learn to code, or is there an exchange model to interface with engineering college students to make prototypes together. Not sure what should be the right model at design education level, uh, but as a concept, it is quite interesting, definitely quite interesting, because it tends to prepare students for the next level of product development and possibly stakeholder interactions, which typically we tend to start learning on the job or possibly during internships. And in fact, extending that thought, it could get even more interesting if schools can think of introducing product management or program management as peripheral functions or interactions during design courses to give a truly real life essence of how product development happens in the industry. What are the roles and responsibilities? What are the handover points? How triad based collaboration happens? Something that students would go through in profession, definitely, but it may add value at this stage, in their student portfolios, and possibly equip them better for what's waiting for them outside the gates.
Wow, thank you so much for building in that interesting perspective to our philosophy as well. Thank you, Debayan. Thank you so much for doing this conversation with us. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of learning and a lot of take home from our conversation for our listeners. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, this is really a great learning for me as well, and great to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.